Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. You are now listening to The Right Side. I am your host, Jeff Doggett, coming to you on the greatest station in the nation, from the greatest location in the nation. Shout out, as we do each week, to everybody listening to us as far north as Kennebunkport, Maine, as far south as Key West, Florida, as far east as Long Island, New York, as far west as Long Beach, California, and all the points in between. For those of you that are listening to us around the world, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever greeting best suits the time zone that you are in. There are several things that you can do to stop the spread of respiratory diseases like COVID-19. First of all, wash your hands for at least 20 seconds with warm soap and water. Now, if you don't know what 20 seconds are, just sing happy birthday to yourself, and when you've completed that song, you've completed 20 seconds. Number two, cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze. Yes, I know that sounds like common sense, but how many of you out there listening to me right now know that the least common thing these days is common sense? Number three, stay at home when you are sick and stay away from people who are sick. Listen, that job or whatever it is that you just think can't go on without you will go on without you. So please stay at home when you're sick and stay away from people who are sick. Also, when you're in an enclosed area like a church or a shopping mall during this Christmas shopping season, or movie theater or playhouse or a sports arena, whatever the case may be, if you're in an enclosed area where there's more than 2 or 3 people around, wear a mask. And if you can, please social distance. Also, too, wipe down frequently touched objects and items with some type of disinfectant. And there's a good idea if you would just keep some hand sanitizer in your vehicle so that when you go to the gas station to pump your gas, you will have something to sanitize your hands with, since you do not know who touched that pump prior to you handling it. And this was brought to you by the National Association of Broadcast Journalists and this station, No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but sure enough bring the noise, powered by Google and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines. If you are in the Cleveland area on the first or the third Saturday of the month, which means if you're here in the Cleveland area next Saturday, you can take advantage of this. Take advantage of what, Jeff? What are you talking about? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. What you can take advantage of every first and third Saturday of the month, if you're in the Cleveland area, is at 6812 Woodland Avenue from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. They are giving away a free bag of groceries. Now, listen. You do not have to show proof of income. You don't have to show proof of residence. You don't have to show EBT card. You don't have to show anything except for one thing, and that is up, in that you show up to receive the free bag of groceries, no questions asked. But it doesn't stop there. No, 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 no. In addition to receiving the free bag of groceries, you also get free clothing for adults and children. So you get free clothing for yourself and also for any children that you have. But no, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't stop there either, because not only do you get free groceries, not only do you get free clothing for yourself and children, but if you are there between 11:30 a.m. and 2 p.m., you get a free hot lunch. That's right, a free hot lunch. So that dispels the notion that there is no such thing as a free lunch, because you get one here, and not only is it a free lunch, folks, but it is a home-cooked hot meal that will be good to your taste palate and fill your stomach. So you can't beat that, folks, with a hockey stick. Free clothing, free groceries, and a free hot meal. And this, once again, is every first and third Saturday at 6812 Woodland Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. And we want to thank the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, Major Care Ministries, and also Williams Temple Church of God in Christ, who hosts this event every first and third Saturday of the month. For those of you that are new to this program, where have you been all this time? Well, since you are new, let me just clue you in on what we do here. This is a radio talk show, meaning that I throw topics out on the table. I give my take on those topics. And since this is a dialogue show, not a monologue show, you are invited to call in at 216 939 5087, 216 939 5087, to give your take on the topics of the day that we have out here. We talk politics, we talk sports, and we talk the issues of the day. So today our topics are as follows. We are going to talk about this. Now that the Democrats have control of the Senate, what if anything should black people expect as a result of the Democrats having control of the Senate? Because after all, especially in Georgia, where Reverend Warnock won the runoff election this past Tuesday against Herschel Walker, he won that election primarily due to the fact of a large African American turnout in the state of Georgia. Not only in this time, but also back in January of 2021, which carried not only Reverend Warnock to the Senate, but also Senator John Ossoff. So, given that fact, and given the fact that in other key races across the country, Democrats won their Senate seat because of high voter turnout or majority voter turnout among African American voters, they getting the majority of their votes, that is. What, if anything, should black America expect for their votes? I'm going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about Brittney Griner. Now that she has been released, was she unjustly imprisoned? You'll be surprised at my answer at that when we get into that topic, and we've got some other information regarding that. And then what happens with Paul Whelan? If you don't know who Paul Whelan is the other American being held in Russia right now that is still there. He was there longer than Ms. Griner. In fact, he was arrested in 2018, tried and convicted in 2020 to a 16-year sentence. So we're going to talk about him as well in that segment. We talk politics and sports. As I said, our sports topics tonight is the awarding of the Heisman Trophy. So we're going to give our pick on who we think is going to win the Heisman Trophy and why we think they should win it. And we may or may not give predictions today regarding the upcoming college football playoff now that we have the Final Four, which were announced on Sunday. If you missed it, Georgia's number 1. The Wolverines are number 2. TCU is number 3. And Ohio State backed in at number 4. And so on New Year's Eve at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona, the Wolverines and TCU meet. And then at 8 o'clock that same night at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia and Ohio State meet. So we may get to that topic as well. And if there's anything, of course, at the end we do our hero and zero of the week. But if there's anything else that you have on your mind that we didn't put out there, you'll feel free to call us as well. We take calls on topics that are off subject as well. We just ask that your takes, whatever they be concise, make sense, and that you do not ramble on. So our call-in number again is 216-939-5087. So here we go. So the Democrats now have control of the Senate. Now, before yesterday, because of the Warnock win in the Georgia runoff this past Tuesday, they had a 51-49 seat advantage in the Senate. However, yesterday, former Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona declared that she is no longer a member of the Democratic Party. Now, she did not switch over to the Republican Party. She is now identifying herself as an independent. Now, before you go too far off the rails on that, Vermont Senator and two-time Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders also is an independent. I don't know if many of you knew that or not, but he is. So she said in her statement yesterday, in her press release, that she's not going to join the Republican caucus, And because she's now becoming an independent, it's not going to change her vote on issues that she feels strongly about. So it remains to be seen how she's going to vote on crucial issues and key pieces of legislation that may come up in this session of the Senate. So now with the declaration of Kirsten Sinema yesterday as an independent, it's still at a Democratic advantage. It's now 50 to 49, which is still a slim advantage, but it's an advantage nonetheless, because prior to the midterm elections, it was a 50-50 split in the Senate. So what does all this mean? What should black people who, especially in Georgia, but to a lesser extent in Pennsylvania, help get Fetterman elected due to the turnout in the Philadelphia area, which was predominantly people of color, and got Fetterman elected senator in Pennsylvania, flipping that seat from the retiring Pat Toomey, who was a Republican, to Democrat Douglas Fetterman. And other key races across the country in Arizona and Nevada. People of color played a primary role in Democrats retaining those two seats. What should people of color, and primarily African American people, expect in return for their vote? Because you all, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know that I'm a strong advocate of the vote, because that's how you get things. You do not get things by sitting at home saying, well, it doesn't make any difference anyway because they're all corrupt, so I'm not voting for anyone. Or you don't get things by sitting at home and say, well, you know, I'm not really into politics. Well, whether you're into politics or not, politics are into you, because it determines your neighborhood makeup, your tax base, the type of school systems you're going to have, the type of fire and safety and healthcare services that you're going to have, and so on and so on and so forth, are all politically determined from the womb to the tomb. So you know that I'm an advocate of this. So, and you've heard me say, if you're a regular listener to the show, that if you want certain things and you need to vote in people who are going to deliver the policies and programs that you want to see to advance your people or advance what it is that you want. So, that said, now that the Democrats have control of the Senate, what should black people expect? Well, there are three things. Actually, there are more, but I narrowed it down to three particular things that African American people and people of color should expect from this Democratic Senate. Small minority though it is, no minority nonetheless. And just for FYI, because I know some of you out there thinking, well, even if Kirsten Sinema votes, it's still only 51. Don't you need 60 votes to pass legislation to make it filibuster proof? Yes and no. Yes, 60 votes does make it filibuster proof, but if there's a piece of legislation that you really want to get through and you have the majority, which the Democrats do, you can pass it through reconciliation. So just so that you know that as well. So here are the three things that I've identified that black people and people of color should expect from their Democratic elected officials in the Senate, since they're in there primarily because of the votes of people of color. Number one, voting reform, voting rights reform. Black people and people of color should expect this Senate to introduce the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. It has yet to see the floor of the Senate because it was when it was first introduced, when it first passed the House back in 2020, the Republicans controlled the Senate, so they did not even let it get a hearing on the floor for a vote. Then after that, in 2021, it was a 50-50 split, and it couldn't get through in reconciliation because Kristen Sinema did not vote for it, and neither did Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator of West Virginia. So they did not have enough votes to even pass it by reconciliation. Now you do. Now you have the 51 that you need. So now Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are not as relevant as they were before. They do not have the same amount of power that they had before, where they could block certain pieces of legislation. So black people and people of color should expect from this Democratic-controlled Senate some type of voting rights bill, some type of voter reform that will undo voter suppression laws that have been passed in various states across this country. You see, the provisions of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act will be this, is that when a state changes its voting laws or voting requirements, as states such as Georgia and Texas did, to make it more difficult for citizens to vote, a federal review board set up by the federal government can review that, and if that does not pass their smell test, that can be overruled and overturned. And so, given the fact that in Georgia, in this last runoff election, that people had to stand in line for hours upon hours to vote because voting by mail and voting by drop box and what have you were severely curtailed in the state of Georgia, but the people still came out. Severely curtailed in the state of Texas back in November, and other states that have just recently, since 2020, passed these types of legislation. It is paramount and ultra necessary for the Senate to pass this John Lewis Voting Rights Act to make sure that every American who is eligible has easy access to vote. That hurdles and restrictions that are put in place to try to discourage people from voting can be removed. And let's just be totally honest here. Let's cut away the fat and get to the meat. These voter suppression laws were only passed in states that have Republican-controlled legislatures in their states because the Republican Party was not winning on a national level. They were trying to do whatever they could do to suppress the votes of people who are not going to vote for them. Instead of talking with these voting blocs and seeing exactly what it is they want and seeing if they can make it part of their platform, I would even question as to what is their platform. So I haven't heard what their platform is. One of the things that they used to talk about was repealing the Affordable Care Act, which is known as Obamacare. But the Affordable Care Act got passed in 2010. Here we are in 2022, 12 years later, and they are still yet in 12 years to come up with an alternative plan so that people that are on Obamacare can still receive health care. That's just one for example. They talked about during the midterm elections about how crime was rampant and made crime an issue, and yet the day after the election, you didn't hear them talking about crime anymore. That was just a ploy to scare voters in the suburbs to vote Republican, and yet they had no answers to how to curb these rising crime rates, especially violent crime rates in the country. Where those on the other side propose sensible gun legislation that perhaps curtails some of the violent crime that we see in our country. Gun legislation, by the way, that is approved of by 90% of Americans and by 90% of people who belong to the National Rifle Association. And so instead of trying to reach out to these groups, to people of color, to young people, etc., those who have voted primarily Democratic, the Republican Party's answer to that was to pass laws that would severely restrict people from voting. So now that the Democrats have control of the Senate, and let's just be brutally frank about it, unless someone has an epiphany overnight, they're not going to get the 60 votes they need to make this filibuster proof. Since you now have control of the Senate, you need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act by reconciliation. Chuck Schumer himself, who is the Senate Majority Leader, senator from New York, said back in the summer, give me control of the Senate and I will give you let me rephrase that. Give me control of the Senate and I will see to it that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act gets voted on. Because before it didn't even get voted on, before it never even saw the light of day on the floor of the Senate to even be debated. The Republicans repressed that. So number one, top of the list, is voting rights. If you still want to hold office, Senate Democrats, then you need to pass this legislation in order to make it more easy for people to vote. Remove these restrictions. Every U.S. citizen who is of age should have the right the right to vote, and that should be made as easy and simple as possible. Not to put all these barriers for people to jump over, not all these hoops that people need to jump through. It's almost like what it used to be like prior to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, when there were laws on the books primarily in southern states that were purposely drawn up and written to keep black people from voting. Poll tax, that hurt poor whites too. Literacy tests. You know, the late great comedian Dick Gregory told a joke one time that this black scholar who had graduated from Yale went to vote in Mississippi and went to take the literacy test. So he passed part of it, and then they handed him a newspaper written in Chinese, and he was able to read it. And so then they said, well, if you can read this newspaper and it's in Chinese, then you must be a communist, so you can't vote. And though he said that jokingly, those were the type of barriers that people had to overcome prior to the 1965 Voting Rights Act to be able to vote in this country. Folks, lest you get it twisted, lest you a fool, this is a pretty recent phenomena that all Americans who are eligible to vote could vote. This is pretty recent. White females did not get the universal right to vote in this country until 1919. That was just a little over 100 years ago. Black folks, male and female, did not get the right to vote in this country until 1965, which was 57 years ago, in my lifetime. So this is a relatively new phenomena, folks. Don't think that this has been something that's been around forever. No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. It has been the history of this country to try to suppress the votes of those who are people of color. That's why you hear the lie perpetuated on right-wing media outlets such as Fox News and Newsmax and other right-wing outlets that the people coming over the border, that the Biden administration does and Democrats don't want to do anything to stem the tide of illegals crossing the border because they want those people coming in here because they know they're going to vote Democrat. They don't know that. That's a lie. But again, I think you can see the not so thinly veiled racism in this. So number one on the docket, Democratic-controlled Senate, get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed. Either get it by convincing 9 of your Republican colleagues to see the light, to get on the right side of history, to stop trying to suppress people from voting. Mitt Romney, Utah; Susan Collins, Maine; Ben Sass, Nebraska. Just to name 3 off the top of my head, your more, quote, sensible, unquote, Republicans. But if they don't, if they continue to want to vote to suppress people and deny people their basic right as a citizen, then get it passed by reconciliation. So that's number 1. Number 2, police reform. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Another bill that passed the House in 2020, but has yet to see the light of day on the floor of the Senate. Now, there was a bipartisan committee of 2 that was set up last year that had Republican Senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, and Democratic Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, on it, along with Congresswoman Beatty at that time from California, to come together and try to formulate a bill, a compromise bill, if you will, that would pass the Senate for police reform. I don't think that there should be any debate as to whether or not we need police reform in this country. Am I coming on here saying defund the police? No, I'm not. Am I coming on here saying that law enforcement is not needed? Of course not. That's not what I'm saying. That's another lie that Republican candidates running for various offices across this country during the midterm elections, that's another lie that they try to perpetuate and perpetrate, that the Democrats were for defunding the police, that Joe Biden wanted to defund the police, and that is an out, bald-faced lie straight from the pits of hell, because no Democratic candidate has said that. In fact, President Biden has said the exact opposite of that. But they know that most people don't read, most people don't do research, most people just believe what they want to believe, especially when it's espoused on the networks that they watch. So that lie was perpetrated and perpetuated, but was defeated in November and on Tuesday in Georgia. We need police reform. It is for the betterment of the police department and the communities that they serve. Police reform is needed. The thing that held up the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that Tim Scott wouldn't let go of, and Cory Booker, to his credit, wouldn't negotiate, said it's non-negotiable, is qualified immunity. Now, I don't know where you fall, which side you fall on that, but I am in favor of the repeal of qualified immunity. Now, if you don't know what qualified immunity is, it's this. It's basically this. When a police officer, say the police officer who murdered George Floyd, okay, just for an example, Derek Chauvin. When a police officer crosses the line and commits an act, and the family sues that police officer and wins their case. I believe the Floyd family did exactly that to the Minneapolis Police Department and won their case. I forget how much money they got, but it was in the millions. What happens is not, because police departments across this country have qualified immunity, that settlement comes out of the coffers, if you will, of that city, which means that taxpayers in that city are funding the payment to that family. So in essence, if George Floyd's family resided in the city of Minneapolis, where this occurred, then they are actually, their tax money that they are paying is actually being used to pay their settlement. If qualified immunity is repealed, then what would happen in these type of cases is that the cities would no longer be responsible financially for the payout in these civil lawsuits. So what does that mean, and how would that help police reform? Well, how that would help police reform, in my opinion, the way I see it is this, is without qualified immunity, that may cause, even if it's only a dozen or a handful of officers to think before they cross that line, at least that's that handful or dozen that don't wind up like George Floyd or Rashard Brooks or so many others. Police unions fight it. The Republican Party fights it. As I said, Tim Scott would not budge and on keeping it out of, rather, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Cory Booker would not budge on keeping it in the act, and now, therefore, it didn't even get to the floor and there was no vote taken. Here again, because it's primarily, although not exclusively, communities of color who are the victims of this police excess. And here, let me stop here before you all get it twisted what I'm saying. I'm not painting police with a broad brush here. Those of you that are regular listeners to the show know that my first cousin was a Cleveland police officer who was killed in the line of duty in 2008. So I'm not broad brush painting all police officers and police departments saying that they're corrupt and they're over the line and what have you. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that I am in favor of this qualified immunity being removed so that in a situation such as George Floyd, in a situation such as Tamir Rice, in a situation such as Eric Garner, and so on and so forth, that perhaps a police officer, before he or she would cross that line, may stop and think and not cross that line. And if it saves 5 or 10 lives, isn't that worth it? And since communities, as I said a moment ago, since communities of color are primarily but not exclusively the victims of this police excess, and since these communities are the ones who came out and voted for you in overwhelming numbers, Democratic senators who now control the Senate, if you want these people to continue to vote for you, then you're going to have to give them some of the things that they are asking for and have been asking for in order to keep their vote. And so here again, if you cannot get 9 of your Republican colleagues to agree with you on this so that you can have the necessary 60 votes you need in order to overcome any filibuster, then this is something else that you may consider passing through reconciliation. You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. Our call-in number is 216-939-5087, 216-939-5087. Number 3, affirmative action. So the Democrats, now that they have control of the Senate, need to introduce and pass legislation that will protect affirmative action. There is a move within the country right now to do away with affirmative action programs. And especially with the conservative, right-leaning Supreme Court that is seated right now, it is of utmost importance that the Senate take some action to protect this. Now, you heard me talk about this on the show a few weeks ago, how Clarence Thomas, Justice Clarence Thomas, who, by the way, was a beneficiary of affirmative action when he was in law school, when the case was heard before the Supreme Court, said that he was not aware of these type of programs. He didn't know anything about them or the benefit of them when he was a personal beneficiary of them. Now, you may make the argument this is now 2022, there shouldn't be quotas or set-aside programs or what have you. I stand on the opposite side of that because I know that unless certain institutions in this country are not required to admit percentage of minority students, applicants, etc., whatever the case may be, they're not going to do it. It's as simple as that. They are not going to do it. And it will go back to what it was like prior to the 1970s when this came into being. So the Senate, who is there, you 50 Democratic senators, and Kirsten Sinema, who just declared herself an independent, you are there. One of the reasons that you are there in the seat that you have now is due to the votes of people of color, people who will be directly affected by these three items that I just mentioned: voting rights, police reform, and affirmative action. So let's see what's going to be done. You know, we ranted and railed and raved on this program for 5 or 6 months, begging and pleading with people across the country to get out and vote. And while the numbers weren't what we hoped them to be, enough of you did come out where the Democrats now have control of the Senate. And again, as you've heard me say on this program, I don't ride donkeys or elephants. I ride what's true. That's why we call this show The Right Side. However, I look at the policies and programs espoused by both parties. And I see that the Republican Party is not promoting, espousing any of these things. In fact, they're contrary to this. So that's why I urged you to vote for these Democratic candidates. And some of the people I urged you to vote for did not win. So, rightfully so, you should now expect something for your vote. Let me caution you, though. One election does not bring about all the change that is needed. So, if we only get one of these three things that I just talked about in the next couple of years or so, between now and the 2024 presidential election, don't let that be the reason that you say, well, I'm just staying at home because, all we got was voting rights. We didn't get police reform. They didn't try to protect affirmative action. They didn't do anything to try to make sure that President Biden's executive order got through regarding student loan forgiveness. So forget it, I'm not voting. Don't do that. People, It takes more than one election cycle to get things done. Look at the other side. Now, I don't know where your stand is on this issue, but just take this into consideration. Roe versus Wade, which made abortion legal in the U.S., came into being in 1973. The extreme right and the evangelical right of the Republican Party kept electing officials over and over and over again who promised to overturn Roe versus Wade, who promised to appoint judges that will be in the position to do this. And finally, after 50 years almost, in the summer of last year, you had the Dobbs decision that's basically overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, it backfired on them because that was one of the issues that motivated especially younger people to come out and vote this past November. And in all likelihood, the Democratic-controlled Senate is going to codify Roe versus Wade. But just to show you the persistence that these voters believe so much in this cause that they kept voting. Some even made it. Some were even one-issue candidate voters. They voted on for you or against you based on your stand versus whether you were pro-life or pro-choice. They didn't give up. And almost 50 years later, they got the decision overturned. So I'm saying that to say this to you, that because you may not see everything that you want to see or get everything that you want to get in the next couple of years or so, it may take more than it. Well, I'm not going to say it may. In all likelihood, it's going to take more than one election cycle to get police reform, to get affirmative action codified, to get John Lewis. If you only get one, celebrate that and keep fighting for the others. You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. I'm going to start this topic here, too, and then we're going to carry it into past the break time, because we're about 10 minutes away from the 4 o'clock hour here in the East, where we're located. Brittney Griner, Olympic champion, WNBA superstar, MVP, scoring leader, multiple All-American when she was at Baylor University, was arrested in Russia back in February as she was preparing to leave the country to come back to the United States. She was arrested because they found small traces of marijuana in her vape. And she was released on Thursday of this week after much negotiation. She was released in a prisoner exchange for convicted arms dealer and arms smuggler, Victor Bout, who was dubbed the Merchant of Death because he was conspiring to sell arms to terrorists that were going to kill Americans. He was a notorious international arms dealer who got caught up in a sting and was arrested back in 2008. Was sentenced and was not scheduled to be released from prison until 2029, I believe it was. So Brittney Griner was released after a 9-month stay in prison in Russia, where she pleaded guilty to drug possession and was sentenced just last month to 9 years hard labor in a Russian labor camp for possession of narcotics. And all during the time that she was in prison, it was debated back and forth, is she unjustly being held? Was she unjustly arrested? And I never touched the topic because I didn't want to say anything on the topic until if and when she was released. So now that she was released, now I feel free to talk about this. And I welcome your take on this at 216-939-5087. I would say categorically and most emphatically that no, she was not unjustly arrested. And here's why. Americans have to realize, well, let me say this first. Americans, for the most part, not all, because I never say all about any group of people, but for the most part, Americans have this sense of entitlement, the audacity to think that because I'm an American, that wherever I go, then American law and American customs apply no matter where I am and no matter where I go because I'm an American citizen. Well, it doesn't work that way, folks. When you are in a foreign country, the same laws that abide here in the U.S. do not abide or apply necessarily in that country. So here's the first thing you need to do before you go overseas. You need to, first of all, see if there's a travel alert for that country, and if so, why? And then you make your decision as to why you're going to go there. Now, Brittney Griner was there not as a tourist. She was there playing basketball for a team in Russia. And of course, there was an argument made during that time that if women, professional basketball players in the WNBA were paid the same amount of money that men in the NBA made, they wouldn't have to go overseas to places like this to supplement their income. My take on that is the reason for the pay disparity, in my opinion, and you can disagree with this if you want, that's fine. But the reason for the pay disparity is that women's basketball, WNBA basketball, does not have the same television contract, does not generate the same revenue as the NBA, and is not as popular as the NBA. And so therefore, that's why there is the disparity in pay between the two. Welcome to the Right Side, caller. State your name and where you're calling from.
Kenneth Garner, Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, Kenneth, what's on your mind?
Oh, I like your show. It's just I've been Mark Harrison, one of my clients, turned me on to it, and I just like to listen to your show.
Well, we appreciate you listening. You have any thoughts on what it is we're talking about right now?
Not right now. I just want to. For sport, he sent me the number just the other day again. And I just want to listen and see what's going on. And if I have any thoughts, I'll let you know.
All right. Well, thank you for your call. So as we were saying before the call, that's the reason for the pay disparity. Now, you can argue the rights and wrongs of that, all you wish, really, if you want to talk about that, that's fine. I'm really personally not going to get into that right now. But what Americans have to realize is when you go to a foreign country, you need to check out everything that there is to know about that country before you go there. You need to know what are the laws regarding whatever it is that you're going to be doing over there. Whether there's a stringent penalties for littering, for example. Whatever the case may be. So Brittney Griner was not unjustly arrested because Brittney Griner broke a law of the country that she was in. She was not in the United States, where she wouldn't have got into trouble for having the small amount of marijuana that she had in her vape. She was in Russia. Not only was she in Russia doing something that violated the law, but the timing couldn't have been any worse. Because she was attempting to come back here right around the time that the gangsterous thug, war criminal Vladimir Putin was invading Ukraine. So here's my take on this. So I do not adhere to those who say that she was unjustly arrested, because she wasn't. My problem was that she was being used as a political pawn, but she put herself in the position to be used that way, because you have to know the law of where you're going to be so that you do not do anything that violates those laws. Now, she want to get down that way, that's her business, but you can't do it in a country like that. Get caught and then expect to have the same thing happen to you there that would happen to you in the U.S. It doesn't work that way. And so this should serve as a warning to U.S. citizens that before you go somewhere, you need to find out all you need to know. You need to look, as I said, you need to go to the State Department website to see what countries are on a watch list and why they are on there before you decide to travel there. Then you need to, what you do. All right, come on. I mean, we're not pulling any punches here. You know what you do. You know how you like to get down. So you need to find out that if what you like to do and how you like to get down, if that's illegal in that country, then you need to put it on ice till you get back to the U.S. You cannot go to Russia or Pakistan or China or some of these other countries, or Saudi Arabia, some of these other countries that are on the State Department watch list, and do whatever you think you can do that you do in the U.S. It's not going to fly. So, am I being unsympathetic to her? No. I felt pain for. I'm sorry, someone on the line?
Yeah, he didn't hang up.
I am. I'm listening.
Okay, you had to clear the line, so because if somebody wants to call, just in case. But,
Okay.
Yeah. So you can't do that. All right. So do I not feel sympathy for her? Of course I do. For her and her family to be, I couldn't even imagine the horrors that she went through being black, female, and a lesbian in that society. Knowing the racial animus that Putin has towards people of color. Knowing how people who are openly gay in that country are treated. So, yes, I have some sympathy for her and those who love her. However, Brittney Griner was the victim of her own bad judgment, not the bad judgment of someone else. Now, she was, as I said, she was a political pawn, and the games were being played. Yes, all that is true. However, what? Let's take a break, and I'll come back on the other side of the break here to further address this, because I got some thoughts regarding Paul Whelan. I got some thoughts regarding statements that were made primarily by Kevin McCarthy, Donald Trump Jr., QAnon Queen Margie Taylor Greene, and others regarding Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan. But we're going to take a break here. We're going to listen to some music and some of our commercials from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with you on the other side. You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise.
Has violence happened to you or your family? Violence can affect all parts of your life, sometimes in ways you can't see. Violence can affect the way you eat, sleep, it cause you to lose focus, for angry, afraid, or even use drugs or drinking as a way to escape. But we're here to tell you that violence doesn't have to keep hurting, and you can change your life starting now with help from the Trauma Recovery Center. Take control of your life because today can be the day. The Trauma Recovery Center offers real help for real needs in real time. They offer services for food, clothes, safety, emotional support, and a whole lot more. So listen, don't let violence control you. You can break free and TRC can help. Give them a call at 216 644 5487. They will come to you wherever you are. Call today. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Call today. It's free, it's 24/7 and confidential. So look, if you want out and don't know where to start, call the Trauma Recovery Center. The Trauma Recovery Center will help you take back your life after violence started today. If you call today, you can get the help you need today that will respond within minutes. I'm not talking about anything over 5. Call today if you need the help today, if you know someone else who needs the help. The number's on the screen, and if you're listening, 216 644 5487. The Trauma Recovery Center of Northeast Ohio, also affiliated with the Center for Families and Children. And now, like we do every week about this time, our History 365. And you guys, let me tell you something. You know, I go through this list every single week. You know, good 5 to 6 days a week. You could, 5 to 6 days a week, at the least 5 days a week. And when I tell you that I am always amazed, you know, it's like a new flower opens up in my brain every day, and I cannot believe the accomplishments and the things that our people, our ancestors created and brought to the table. Everything that the light touches, everything that's necessary, required, and desired today and every day, past and present, our people. So, listen, you know, I guess I'm gonna roll with Alice. Hey, give it up for the ladies today. And Alice H. Parker, born in 1895 and left here in 1920, was a inventor known for her patent for the gas furnace. Yes, the gas furnace. Inspired by the effectiveness of her fireplace during cold New Jersey winters. Let's get into this a little bit more. Oh wow, you just wanna cut me off, huh? Oh wow. What? This is amazing. Okay, they just showed me some other stuff, but I'm gonna go back. Let me get Alice again. My apologies, you guys. It's so much. I'm gonna stick with the one that gives a good knowledge of it, you know, up front. You know, I went to this other page to show me more people that were connected to her, you know, who created the dryer, which in the first dryer was the gas dryer. Of course, the electric one came later on, and we got another brother who did that too. But oh, jeez. So oh wait a minute. I'm sorry, you guys. This thing is just giving me an old doozy today. I want Alice, and it wants to be difficult about giving me Alice and her information. So let's get, okay, so here we are. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so Parker was a highly educated woman who graduated with honors in 1910 from Howard University, Academy, a historically Afro-American university that accepted both male and female students since its founding in November of 1866, shortly after the Civil War. According to the census data, Parker worked as a cook in the kitchen in Morristown, New Jersey, and lived with her husband, who was a butler. Despite her revolutionary impact on today's modern heating system, there is almost no information recorded on her personal life, which is none of your business anyway, right? Although the specific date of her death is unknown, it is thought that she died in 1920 due to a fire or heat stroke. That's so unfortunate. But as far as her invention is concerned, at the time, central gas heating was yet to be developed, so people railed on burning coal or wood as their main source of heating. While furnaces and the concept of central heating have been around since the Roman Empire, so they say, the science hardly advanced in the years that followed, and the heating methods utilized by the end of the 19th century were still relatively primitive in nature. So Parker felt that the fireplace alone was not enough to keep her and her home warm during the cold New Jersey winters, and went to design the first gas furnace that was powered by natural gas and the first heating system to contain individually controlled air ducts that distributed heat evenly throughout the building. In more technical terms, Parker's heating system used independently controlled burning units that drew in cold air and conveyed the heat through the heat exchanger. This air was then fed into individual ducts to control the amount of heat in different areas. What made her invention particularly unique was that it was a form of zone heating, where temperature can be moderated in different parts of the building. Although the invention had a massive positive impacts, it also came with a few downsides. Her design posed a few health and safety risks as it made certain appliances like the oven more flammable and unsafe to touch. But a brother took care of that later on. You guys will talk about that next week. And unsafe to touch. The regulation of the heat flow also posed as a security risk. Of course, they're going to point out everything bad, but we'll, of course, get into how she overcame. On the other hand, Parker's invention also decreased the risk of house or building fires that heating units pose by eliminating the need to leave a burning fireplace on throughout the night. Go, girl. With her idea for the furnace used with moderations to eliminate safety concerns, it inspired and led the way to features such as thermostats. In parentheses, we'll talk about this brother the following week. He created the thermostat. Zone heating also forced air furnaces, which are common features in the modern central heating. Additionally, by using natural gas, it heated homes much more efficiently than wood and coal counterparts, which were more time consuming and expensive. Parker's invention was further improved in 1935 when she created forced convection wall heaters that use a coal furnace, electric fan, and duct throughout the home. Nowadays, homes utilize thermostats and forced air furnaces, which can be attributed to Parker's design and invention of the central heating system. Her filing for the patent precedes both the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement, which made her accomplishments especially impressive, as it removed many barriers for us Black women of her generation. We salute you, we thank you, we honor you. Thank you for your contributions. And now, back to Jeff Doggett and the right side.
Thank you, Marie. And as we do each week, we learn something and we get educated. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So before the top of the hour break, we were talking about the Brittney Griner case. And I want to talk about Paul Whelan. Paul Whelan is an ex-U.S. Marine who is still in Russian custody. Now, Paul Whelan worked for he was an ex-U.S. Marine, and he worked as a security executive for a Michigan-based automated supplies chain called Borg Warner, okay? And it was, as I said, it's an automotive parts supplier. And he was in Russia in 2018 at a wedding. He has dual citizens. As a matter of fact, he has triple citizenship. He's a citizen of the U.S., he's a citizen of Ireland, and he's a citizen of the U.K. And he was in Russia for a wedding in 2018. And on December 28th of 2018, he was arrested in his hotel room for having a flash drive that, quote, had Russian state secrets on it, unquote. His contention was that this flash drive that he he thought were wedding photos that were given to him by a friend of his there in Russia who attended the wedding. His trial was held in 2020, and he was sentenced to 16 years hard labor for espionage. Now, the question that was brought up the other day was, why weren't both Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan released, or both their releases negotiated for the exchange of this notorious arms dealer, as we said, the merchant of death, who sold weapons and conspired to kill Americans? Why weren't both of them released? And then you had some on the far right. You had Donald Trump Jr., who said that the Biden administration did this to raise their, quote, DEI credibility, of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You had his father say that Brittney Griner should not have been released because she hates America.
Where did he get that from?
Yeah, we're going to get that in a moment. And you had the QAnon queen, Margie Taylor, soon to not be green anymore, as her and her husband are going through a divorce, say that this was, quote, another reason why Joe Biden should be impeached. And many on the right were decrying this. Why was not Paul Whelan released instead of Brittney Griner? And how come this was not negotiated this way? You left a Marine behind, etc. Now, let's look at this. Okay, first of all, Marjorie QAnon Taylor, soon to not be green anymore. Donald Trump Jr. and former President Donald Trump showed how disingenuous and hypocritical they are by any remarks that they made, because, as I just stated to you, Paul Whelan was arrested in Russia in 2018 in December. Who was president in 2018?
You know it.
When he was sentenced in 2020, who was president in 2020 when he was sentenced?
You already know.
So, of course, we know who it was. And so for those on the right, especially Donald Trump Jr. and then Tucker Carlson coming on his show also saying that Brittney Griner hates America because this is what they're basing this on. During the Black Lives Matter protests after the George Floyd lynching, Brittney Griner came out and made a statement that at her Phoenix Mercury basketball games, she felt as though the national anthem should not be played because of what was going on at that time. She also called for a boycott of WNBA by WNBA players, as NBA players were doing at that time. So based on those statements and those actions, Tucker Carlson and others on the right came up with the premise that she hates America, and so therefore she should not benefit from America by being released or release being negotiated. So why did Putin release Griner and not Whelan? I believe that Putin released Brittney Griner and not Whelan because he knew that this was going to be the type of reaction that was going to happen, and he's doing whatever he can do to continue to widen the divide in this country and to continue to have Americans divided between one another. This is why he did that. This is why I believe that he allowed Brittney Griner to be released and not Paul Whelan to be released. Facts of the matter are this, that since Donald Trump has such a cozy relationship with Vladimir Putin, since those on the right, like Tucker Carlson, for example, who when Russia invaded Ukraine said that I'm rooting for Russia, since all of them are so enamored with and in love with Vladimir Putin, then where was the outcry in 2018 and 2020 when Paul Whelan was first arrested and then he put on trial and convicted in 2020? In fact, Paul Whelan himself cried out from behind the glass at his trial for Donald Trump to do something. Donald Trump, then President of the United States, who allegedly, firmly, and really have this cozy relationship, if you will, with Vladimir Putin, did nothing at all, did not lift a finger to try to bring Paul Whelan home. Now, we don't know what negotiations are going on behind the scenes right now between the Biden administration and Russia to try to bring Paul Whelan home. He's in a labor camp in the section of Russia called Mordovia, that's 210 miles east of Moscow. And of course, his family, rightfully so, is very much concerned. Statements that were issued on Thursday by the president, also by the Brittney Griner's family and others, are saying that they're not forgetting about Paul Whelan and that they're praying for and still working on behind the scenes for his release. But as I said, the outcry, if you will, from Kevin McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy's statement was that President Biden negotiated Brittney Griner's release is because she's a liberal Democrat, and therefore he was appealing and playing to his base. In other words, we're bringing politics into this again. But again, the hypocrisy and the disingenuousness of these people on the right crying out now is that Tucker Carlson didn't say anything back in 2018 when Paul Whelan was arrested. Tucker Carlson didn't say anything in 2020 when Paul Whelan was sentenced. Neither did Kevin McCarthy. Neither did QAnon Margie. Neither did Donald Trump Jr. And neither did the one who could have done something about it.
His Pepe.
Donald Trump, who was president at the time. So my prayer and I believe my prayer rather is that the Paul Whelan is soon released, and I know that the Biden administration is working behind the scenes to release him. And once again, Vladimir Putin could have released both of them in exchange for this notorious arms dealer, this man who conspired, as I said, with terrorist groups to sell arms to terrorist groups that were pledged to kill Americans. This merchant of death, Putin could have released both of them. But he chose to release Brittney Griner for the reasons that I stated above, that he did it to further cause a divide within the country. That's my take on it. Listen, I'm glad Brittney Griner's home. I'm hoping and I'm praying that people across this country saw what happened to her and will be very careful when they go to foreign countries to realize that the same things that you do in the U.S., you can't do overseas. Now, there are people here in the United States right now that are in prison right now for marijuana charges, right here in the U.S. for that matter. All right? There are thousands upon thousands of people in jails across this country for marijuana charges. So even though the laws here are not the same as they are in Russia, don't get it twisted, there's still laws here. So again, it is just another example of the audacity and the sense of entitlement of American people to think that you can do whatever you want to do, no matter where you are, because you're an American. Folks, it's not like that. If you want to go on vacation, and again, she wasn't on vacation, so I'm not talking about her in this sense, but folks, if you want to go on vacation, there are plenty of places here in the U.S. you can go where, you can do your thing, get down how you want to get down, and not worry about being arrested for it, because it's not illegal. There are also other places in the world you can go. But don't go any place thinking that because you're an American, you can do what you want, because you might wind up in some foreign prison somewhere, and you don't have a high profile, and it's the negotiations for you coming back are going to be that much more difficult. So that is my take on that whole situation. Once again, There's nothing that we can have in this country that is not politicized. This event was politicized. The right, as I said, the right-wing press and some politicians were outraged at the fact that the U.S. government negotiated with Russia and gave them back Victor Bout in exchange for Brittney Griner, who they felt got her own self into trouble, which I agree with that. But they felt that because of her listen to this. I want you to hear this, folks. That because of her political views, that because she is left-wing and a liberal, that her release should not have been negotiated. So in other words, if you don't fit into a certain political, and then Tucker Carlson had the nerve to go on to say is that they didn't negotiate, which how does he know that anyway? He doesn't know that the government has not been negotiating the release of Paul Whelan. But he went on to say that the government did not negotiate for his release because he openly came out and said that he was a Trump supporter and that he voted for Donald Trump, so that it's Tucker Carlson's tape that the Biden administration is not going to try to get his release, negotiate for his release because of that. So here again, you have people playing politics. Here again, you have people that are in positions of power and influence making statements based on an individual's political leanings, not whether the right thing was done or not. The right thing was done, folks. This is not the first time in American history we've had prisoner exchanges. If you remember the Marine Bergdahl, who in Afghanistan, now again, he used poor judgment, but wandered off his base and then was captured by Taliban. And this was during the Obama administration. Bergdahl is his name. And the Obama administration negotiated where they allowed the release of 5 Taliban fighters being held in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to be released in exchange for Bergdahl. The Obama and his administration caught a lot of flack behind that. You know, Terry Anderson, the U.S. journalist who was held in Lebanon for many a years. I believe he was held for 10 years and his release was negotiated. This was back in the 80s. So this is not something new. You can go all the way back to Gary Powers, who was shot down over Russia flying a U-2 plane in 1960 when Dwight Eisenhower was president. It's before Kennedy came into office. And Eisenhower was trying to negotiate his release with the Russian government at that time. And then when President Kennedy was able to negotiate the release in exchange for Russian spy, he caught flack behind that as well. This is not something that is new. However, what the insidious nature of it is this, is that instead of celebrating the fact that an American citizen, regardless of her sexual orientation, regardless of her race, regardless of her political leanings, has been released and brought home. Now you want to make it a left versus right issue. Now you want to make it a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. Now you want to more than come right out and say that this was done because of her political leanings and that because she would be a person that would be supportive of the Biden administration and of Democrats, instead of just celebrating the fact that this person was brought home after being held in Russian captivity.
That goes goes to show you how inhumane they are.
What'd you say?
That goes to show you how inhumane they are.
Exactly. For you not to hear that, Marie said that just shows you the inhumanity of it all. And that they are, rather. And listen, no one has forgotten about Paul Whelan.
Absolutely.
No one has forgotten about him. For those like Kevin McCarthy, like Marjorie Taylor, soon not to be green anymore, like Tucker Carlson and others, you don't know what is going on behind the scenes. You don't know what negotiation is going on. You have no clue. But you know what? You really don't want to know because it doesn't fit the narrative that you're trying to push. I wonder what their reaction would have been had the opposite taken place, had Paul Whelan come home and Brittney Griner was still there. I wonder if they would have had the same outrage still. Probably not. Folks, let's be honest about this. Some, if not the majority of this outrage regarding the release of Brittney Griner is due to two things. Well, three things, actually. Her politics, four things. Her politics, her race, her gender, and her sexual orientation. If Brittney Griner was not a black, female, lesbian, liberal, if she, say, were a white, conservative, or centrist, heterosexual female, who was a WNBA star, and then part of it too, and then they're saying that part of her, some are believing rather that her release was due to her celebrity, and that here again was a elitist move, that the elites get privilege that the, quote, everyday person, unquote, does not get. But if Brittney Griner was a white, female, centrist, or conservative Republican WNBA player and was released, would you have seen Tucker Carlson saying what he said? No. Would you see QAnon Margie making the statement that Biden, this is further evidence that Biden should be impeached? No. Would you have seen the statements that you saw from Kevin McCarthy, Little Kev, who is desperately so much wants to be Speaker of the House that he's going to do any and everything that he has to do and say to play to that Trump base in order that he can ensure that he is elected Speaker of the House? No. How about Donnie Jr.? Donnie would have come out and said what he said? No. And neither would the twice impeached, under indictment former president wouldn't have said what he said. So here again, folks, you're seeing politics being played instead of celebrating the release of this individual. Now, those who feel that a Marine was left behind and that he should have had first priority because the Marines leave nobody behind. Okay, I can sympathize with you. But what are you going to do? Should Biden have said it's either both of them or neither one of them? And if he would have done that, then what would have been the fallout and the reaction behind that? Again, what you have to understand is who they are dealing with and the mentality of the person that they are dealing with. Vladimir Putin is a thug, is a war criminal, is a gangster. He's a murderer. He's the butcher of Crimea. He's got the blood of thousands of Ukrainians on his hands. He's got the blood of thousands of Syrians on his hands that he supplied the chemical warfare weapons that Assad used on his own people. He's got the blood of thousands of his own people on his hands. So you have to look at who it is they're dealing with and what his motivation is. Vladimir Putin's motivation was to cause exactly the division that is going on right now. That's why he did that. That's why he didn't release both of them. He doesn't care about Brittney Griner. He's using her once again as a pawn to cause strife and division within the U.S., as he and his operatives did during the 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns when they infiltrated Facebook and Twitter, putting out false information and false narratives out there that caused division among American voters. So if you're going to get angry at somebody, channel your anger in the right direction. And that's towards Vladimir Putin, who by his actions is once again causing division among American citizens. And people are too blind because of their political affiliation and their political loyalty and their cult of personality loyalism to Donald Trump that they can't see exactly what's going on here. But I can see it. That's exactly what's happening. Now, if you disagree with that, you can call in and we can have at it. You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. Our calling number is 216-939-5087. 216-939-5087. Let's switch gears here. We're going to go to, as I call it, the candy store of life. As you heard in the very beginning, if you listened to us at the beginning, and if you're a regular listener to this show, you know that we talk politics, sports, and the issues of the day. Tonight, in New York City at the Downtown Athletic Club, the Heisman Trophy is going to be awarded. And there are 4 candidates. All of them are quarterbacks. Bryce Young from Alabama, Caleb Williams from USC, C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, and I'm sorry, somebody can call and remind me, the young man that's a quarterback at TCU, his name slips my mind right now. Maria, if you could look that up, the quarterback from TCU. These are the 4 finalists for the Heisman Trophy, all 4 quarterbacks. Blake Corum, who plays for the Wolverines, at one time was a leading candidate, but due to his injury 3 weeks ago against Illinois, that knocked him out of Heisman.
Max Duggan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Max Duggan, the quarterback at TCU. Now, throughout most of the season, C.J. Stroud of Ohio State was the perceived front runner and almost a shoo-in for the Heisman. Bryce Young, the quarterback at Alabama, is the defending Heisman Trophy winner. He won it last year. But throughout the season, C.J. Stroud, the consensus was it was his to lose. And unfortunately for him, that's exactly what he did, especially in the last regular season game of the season when they played the Wolverines in their against their arch rivals for the Big Ten East Championship, which was really the pseudo Big Ten Championship because it was almost a given that whoever won that game was going to roll whatever team came out of the Big Ten West. And that's exactly what happened last week. The Wolverines rolled Purdue last week. And yet in the most important and crucial game of the year, not only did C.J. Stroud not have a big game, but he was outplayed by his counterpart, J.J. McCarthy. So that basically, in essence, eliminated him from Heisman consideration. Bryce Young's had an up and down season. His team lost the two most important games of the year, although you can't put it on him, but they lost nonetheless. Lost the last second field goal to Tennessee, lost in overtime to LSU when LSU, instead of kicking an extra point that would have tied the game and sent it to another overtime, Brian Kelly, the LSU coach, opted to go for a 2-point conversion, and they made it and won the game, basically eliminating Alabama from the college football playoffs and eliminating the defending Heisman Trophy winner from retaining his crown. Max Duggan from TCU has had a good year, but nothing outstanding about him. He's been very good. TCU was undefeated until they lost in the Big 12 championship game last week. And so that eliminated him. So that leaves Caleb Williams, the USC quarterback. And Caleb Williams is my pick for the Heisman. And let me just go over his stats and tell you why I am. The year really, no one has really stood out. Like, it's just like right in your face, like, boom, this is so obvious that even Stevie Wonder can see it, like it was last year with Bryce Young. So here are Caleb Williams' stats there at USC. Now, USC is not in the playoffs because USC last Friday night, a week ago yesterday, got steamrolled in the Pac-12 championship game by Utah, 47-24. Second loss this season to Utah. Beat them both times they played in the regular season and then also in the Pac-12 championship game. However, last Friday, I'm not going to put on Caleb Williams because he was injured in that game trying to make a play. So he's basically playing very limited mobility due to a leg injury. But here's his season statistics. He passed for 4,075 yards, which was fourth in the country. He had 37 touchdown passes, which tied him for first in the country. All right. He only threw 4 interceptions, which surprisingly tied him for 12th in the country in interceptions. His QBR, which is quarterback rating, was 5th this year, and his completion percentage was 66.9% of his passes he completed. And in addition to the 37 touchdown passes that he threw and the 4,075 passing yards he had this year, he also rushed for 372 yards and had 10 rushing touchdowns. So, based on those statistics alone, Caleb Williams is my pick for the Heisman this year. Now, again, he had a really good season, but when it came to the most important game of the year, he was unable to lead his team to victory, just like C.J. Stroud was able to, and just like Max Duggan was unable to. And to a lesser extent, Bryce Young was unable to do. So why Caleb Williams over any of these guys? I just believe that of these candidates, he is the most deserving, that he had the best year out of the 4. And had it been any other year, he may have been a finalist, but he would not be a winner. All right? And unfortunately for him, perhaps Blake Corum may have won it this year had he not been injured against Illinois, because based on the way his backup, Donovan Edwards, played in the game against Ohio State, and then also in the Big Ten championship game, you figure that Blake Corum would have done that and probably even more, and that probably would have propelled him to the Heisman. But because he was unable to play, that knocked him out of the Heisman race. So we're going with Caleb Williams as our Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah.
And, deservedly so. And, some of you may say, well, Jeff, what about C.J. Stroud? You're an Ohio State alum. You're a big-time Buckeye fan. And, I'm watching you all right now. You got your Ohio State hoodie on and all that. Yeah, all that is true. But I'm also, not only am I'm a fan, but I also look at things analytically. And I'm a realist. And, again, I tell the truth. I put my fandom aside. Do I want C.J. Stroud to win? And would I like for him to win? Yes. Welcome to the right side. Caller, state your name and where you're calling from. We're got about 5 minutes for you.
Wax calling from Cleveland, Ohio, bro. What's up?
Hey, Wax.
What's up, Wax? How you doing?
I'm sitting here listening to you handicap this Heisman race, and the Stetson Bennett is going to win tonight because he's undefeated on a national championship team, and they back in the playoffs. And Blake Corum, the running back from Michigan, if a backup could have did that against Ohio State and Purdue, don't you think it's more of the line than his talent running the ball? And Caleb Williams is like all the mercenaries that went to USC, the boys from Pitt, what's the boy name? Jerry Rice's son.
Yeah.
All the mercenaries, they went to USC, and they had a stacked team. That's the same thing Deion's gonna do at Colorado. So they don't deserve to win these awards because you got three guys that stayed at their school ever since they came in school. But I think Stetson Bennett gonna win. They gonna give it to somebody from Georgia after that embarrassing everything Herschel Walker put out there. So I'm gonna get off the phone. I'm gonna let you finish handicapping it, and go Ohio State all the way to the championship, bro.
All right, Wax. Thanks for the call. Thanks for listening. Well, Stetson Bennett, yes, Georgia's undefeated. Georgia's the defending champion. But his statistics don't measure up to those who are in the race with him. And you know what, though, Wax? That wouldn't surprise me or shock me if he did win. But the question has to be asked, is Stetson Bennett the best player in America? Because allegedly, that's what the Heisman Trophy Award is given to. It's given to the best player that year in college football. And just from a quarterback standpoint, I think that Stroud, Young, and Williams, all three are better than him. But you make a good point there, and it remains to be seen. Would it shock me if he won? No, it wouldn't. Not at all. I'm wondering why Hendon Hooker didn't. The quarterback at Tennessee, he didn't get invited based on the season that he had. But I guess these losses to Georgia and the losses that they had late in the season derailed his chances. But that wouldn't surprise me. He, based on the odds makers, is the least favorite. Caleb Williams is the odds-on favorite to win. But we've seen surprises before, so that would not shock me that the least talented of the four quarterbacks, in my opinion, would be the one who wins it. So we'll see. It's at 8 o'clock tonight on ESPN. Is the Heisman Trophy show, and we should know around 8:30, 8:45 Eastern time tonight who is the 2022 Heisman Trophy winner. You've been listening to the right side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. We're going to end our program as we do each week with our hero and our zero of the week. Our hero of the week is high school football coach, the Pied Piper of St. Clair, if you will, St. Clair Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, and East 113 is the corner where Glenville High School sits. And our hero of the week is legendary coach Ted Ginn Sr.,
Woo-hoo.
coach of the state champion Division IV Glenville Tarblooders, the first Cleveland public high school to win a state championship in history. The Glenville Tarblooders made history last week in the Division IV championship game last Saturday, defeating Cincinnati, Wyoming 28-6, bringing home the hardware for the first time that a Cleveland public school, inner city school, won the state championship in football. And they were led, I call him the Pied Piper of St. Clair, because he is a legendary, iconic figure that draws these young men from all over the city. He's more than just a coach. He's a father figure to some of those players. He's an encouragement. He's a teacher. He's just everything that you could ask for a coach, and he's a mentor, of course, to these young men. And this is a program, folks, for those of you that are outside of the Cleveland area that don't know, this is a program that has produced people like Frank Clark, who's playing in the NFL right now, Marshawn Lattimore, who's playing in the NFL right now, produced past NFL players like his son, Ted Ginn Jr., like Dante Whitner, for example, just to name a few. Cardell Jones had a brief run in the NFL, came from Glenville High School. But the one thing that he does do is, while not every player, obviously, that comes out of Glenville goes to the NFL, because it's no high school anywhere does that, given the small percentage of players that do go to the NFL, but he gets his kids into college. He gets young men, young black men, from the inner city. Many are coming from single-parent households, many who would be the statistics, if you will, saving them from the streets, the gangs, prison, drugs, etc. He gets these young men into colleges, into higher institutions, these young black males, to get them into positions where they can then create wealth for themselves and their families in the future, where they can get professional jobs, where they can be role models and mentors towards others. So he's been doing that for the longest, and it finally paid off for him this past Saturday, a week ago today, when they brought home the hardware and won the state championship in Division IV in high school football in the state of Ohio. So Ted Ginn Sr. and the Glenville Tarblooders, our hats here on the right side and No Static Radio, our hats are out off to you. And yes, a huge round of applause for what you did. This is your reward for all these years that you put in, Coach Ginn. Starting when you started the Ginn Academy, starting how you mentored these young men for the last 20 plus years or so. And how you done it, not when they just got to Glenville, but that you did it starting in Pee Wee football, talking to, recruiting, and mentoring these young men as well. So, again, our hats are off to you. Our zero of the week is defeated Republican gubernatorial candidate in the state of Arizona, Kari Lake, who lost her bid to become the governor of Arizona in the recent midterm elections by 17,000 votes to Democratic Governor-elect Katie Hobbs. And instead of her accepting the election results, conceding and congratulating her opponent, she is now suing the largest county in the state of Arizona, Maricopa County, suing them for election fraud and saying that, and pinch me if you heard this one before, saying that the election was stolen from her and that it was fraudulent. Oh, by the way, she just happened to pay a visit to Mar-a-Lago this past week. And then after that visit and that trip, now she comes back claiming that the election was stolen. She's suing Maricopa County, the largest county in Arizona, saying that to throw out the votes to either declare her the winner of the election, even though she lost by 17,000 votes, or to hold the election over again in Maricopa County to make the people vote again. Give it up, Kerry. You lost. Just like your cult leader that you follow lost. And just like he did, if you try to bring it through the courts, through these frivolous lawsuits, first of all, I wonder where you're going to find lawyers, because they learned their lesson watching what happened to Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and the others who represented your cult leader. Give it up. You lost. Move on. Accept your loss and go on. But because you can't, because you're bringing forth this frivolous lawsuit, because once again, you're claiming election fraud and election being stolen, you are our zero of the week, Carrie Lake. Yes, and you deserve all of those boos. You've been listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio. We don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. Right now, I see that my time is up. Thank you very much for your time, and until next Saturday at 3 p.m., shalom. I have my phone in my pocket.
We'd like to thank you for tuning in to The Right Side with your host, Jeff Doggett, on a station where we don't bring no static, but we sure enough bring the noise, nostaticradio.net. Make sure you guys check us out on social media, where we absolutely love to hear from you on Facebook.com/No Static Radio LLC, on Twitter at No Static_radio, on Instagram at TheReal_No Static Radio, and on YouTube at No Static Radio. Also, if you guys would like to listen to replays of this show and all others on the platform, please make sure you check us out on Mixler, Mixcloud.com. Just type in No Static Radio in the toolbar for replays of this show and others. Okay. Have a good one. Be safe. And if you like to listen to continuous streaming, that means no refreshing the page, to sit back, relax, wait for a little buffer, and maybe one commercial, and then boom, you're in there on TuneIn.com, LiveOnlineRadio.net, or Media Q for continuous streaming of this show and all others. And for all things No Static Radio, including up-and-coming events, merchandise, and an in-depth look at all our great show hosts here, please check out our website at www.nostaticradio.net. Thank you guys for tuning in on this sensational Saturday. Listen, you stay warm. Go Ohio State. Go Browns. In the Battle of Ohio tomorrow. Go Cavs tonight. And listen, you guys be safe. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your holiday season however you spend it. Happy Kwanzaa. Happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. All that good stuff, you guys. So listen, we got more shows coming up next week, so you guys don't go anywhere. We got a lot of great things coming up from next year, and we just really appreciate you guys watching and listening and being a part of No Static Radio. We appreciate and love you all to no end. And we don't have to know you to love you. Love is the easiest thing for you to give, and it's the easiest thing for you to have. So we love you, and we appreciate you all for listening and watching in every week. Thank you so much. You guys be safe again, stay warm, and we'll see you on Monday with the Bubba Wax Show. Peace.